Imagine leaving for a peaceful family vacation, only to return home and find your keys no longer work, your locks completely replaced, and the people responsible being the very HOA that promised to protect your neighborhood. What they didn't know was that I had cameras rolling inside the whole time. The story begins in the heart of a pristine suburban neighborhood, the kind of place that looks perfectly ordinary on the surface but hides behind its manicured lawns a web of rules, pettiness, and silent wars between homeowners and their association. My house stood near the end of the cul-de-sac, a two-story brick home with white shutters, carefully trimmed hedges, and the exact type of appearance the HOA insisted every property must maintain. For years, I had tried to follow their endless guidelines. Grass length monitored like a soldier's haircut. Trash cans hidden from sight with the precision of a stage curtain. Seasonal decorations approved or removed based on committee tastes. But under all that surface harmony, the HOA board was notorious for its overreach. They thrived on the smallest violations, mailbox paint chipping, patio furniture not neutral enough, or a car parked at the wrong angle in the driveway. And behind this reputation was their president, a woman named Marjorie. Sharp-eyed, rigid, and endlessly nosy, she had become infamous for patrolling the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. I'd had run-ins with her before, nothing major, but enough to know she carried grudges like trophies. It was during the summer when my family and I decided to take a much-needed vacation. A week away in the mountains, far from the HOA's suffocating rules, was exactly what we needed. I locked up the house, double-checked the doors, and set the alarm system. But I had something else too, hidden interior cameras, tucked away where no one would expect them. These weren't for the HOA, of course, just basic security in case of a break-in. I never imagined they'd capture what they eventually did. The first days of the trip were blissful. Hiking trails, fresh air, and no HOA notices tucked under my door. But about halfway through, I received an odd notification from my smart lock app. It alerted me that the lock battery had been tampered with. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just a glitch. After all, the system wasn't perfect. Still, the thought nagged at me. I pulled up the live feed from my cameras, expecting to see the empty, quiet interior of my home. Instead, I was greeted by movement. The footage showed figures inside my living room, two men, both wearing contractor uniforms, accompanied by none other than Marjorie herself. She walked with a clipboard in hand, her expression stern and triumphant, as if she were overseeing an invasion. The men moved to the front door, tools in hand, and began dismantling the locks. I could hear the faint clicking and drilling through the hidden microphone. They weren't breaking in out of desperation or emergency. They were calmly, methodically, replacing my locks. I sat frozen in my rental cabin, watching strangers tamper with my home. Marjorie pointed around the space, making notes as if she were conducting an inspection. One of the men even paused to glance at family photos on the shelf before setting down a box of shiny new lock hardware. The arrogance of it all was almost unbelievable. But there it was, clear as day on camera. The longer I watched, the clearer their intentions became. They weren't there for maintenance or repairs. They were taking control. By the time they finished, the old locks were gone, my keys were useless, and my home was under their thumb. They left paperwork behind on the kitchen counter, documents I couldn't yet read but could see from the angle of the camera. The entire operation had taken less than an hour, but the violation it represented would echo much longer. From hundreds of miles away, I felt powerless. I couldn't storm back into my house and confront them. I couldn't even call a neighbor for help. Marjorie had a way of twisting every situation, and I knew without evidence I'd be painted as the problem. But what they didn't know was that every second of their actions was being recorded in high definition. I had the proof. The rest of the trip became a blur. My family tried to enjoy the remaining days, but my mind never left the footage. I replayed it over and over, each time noticing new details, the smugness on Marjorie's face, the deliberate way she inspected the locks, the quiet smirk of the contractor when he realized no one was stopping him. It was a heist in broad daylight, not for valuables, but for control. When we finally returned home, the reality of the situation hit with full force. My front door resisted the familiar turn of my key. It didn't fit anymore. My own house, the place I had paid for, maintained, and lived in for years, had been locked against me. My family stood behind me, confused and anxious, as I tried again and again. Nothing worked. The locks had been changed, just as I'd seen. And in that moment, standing on my own porch with useless keys in my hand, I felt the weight of betrayal heavier than ever. But this wasn't just about inconvenience. This was about principle. They had trespassed. They had crossed a line no association had the right to cross. And worst of all, they had done it with a sense of authority, as if they were untouchable. I knew then that this was only the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and my cameras held the ammunition I needed. What I didn't realize yet was just how far Marjorie and the HOA were willing to go, or how explosive the fallout would become once I pushed back. The locks were changed. The cameras had captured everything. And I was about to challenge the HOA with proof they never expected me to have. But standing in my own driveway with a family locked out and a neighborhood watching, the question wasn't just what had they done, it was why had they done it, and uncovering that reason would unleash a storm bigger than I could have imagined. Most people think an HOA only sends warning letters and fines. But what if I told you mine tried to seize control of my entire property while I was away, and the new locks were just the beginning, asterisk. Standing on my driveway that morning, keys useless in my hand, I realized I was no longer a homeowner in the traditional sense. I was a trespasser on my own land, locked out by a group of people who claimed to protect the neighborhood. The neighbors peeked from their blinds, whispering behind fences, watching the drama unfold like it was free entertainment. To them, it may have looked like I had simply forgotten to pay dues or broken some unwritten rule. But I knew better. And soon, they would too. The first thing I did was dig into the paperwork left behind. Once I finally managed to enter the house, thanks to a locksmith of my own, the evidence was still there, sitting on my kitchen counter. It was a stack of documents stamped with the HOA's letterhead, labeled Notice of Enforcement Action. Inside, they claimed my property was in violation of multiple covenants. Trash bins not properly concealed. Lawn not uniformly edged. Even a claim that my shutters were painted in a shade not consistent with the approved palette. Petty infractions, every single one. And yet, at the bottom of the notice, was the most shocking line: due to repeated violations, the HOA board has authorized temporary repossession of property access. Repossession of property access. It was a phrase that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just about appearances anymore. They were pretending they had legal grounds to take my home, without a court order, without law enforcement, and without a single hearing where I could defend myself. They had unilaterally decided to shut me out. That's when I turned back to my cameras. The footage was my lifeline, my undeniable proof. I pulled every second from the cloud storage, saving backups on multiple drives. In the videos, Marjorie could be seen directing the contractors, reviewing the papers, and even stating casually that this will teach him. Her arrogance was laid bare. I knew that once the right people saw this, their little plan would crumble. But exposing them wasn't going to be simple. HOAs often thrived because neighbors stayed silent. Many feared retaliation, knowing that a single complaint could turn into a campaign of harassment. I had heard stories: families fined until they sold, residents bullied into leaving, rules bent only to punish specific households. I now understood those weren't just rumors, they were strategies. The next move was gathering allies. I quietly reached out to a few neighbors I trusted, showing them snippets of the footage. Their reactions told me everything. Shock. Anger. Relief that someone had finally caught the board in the act. Some shared their own experiences: unjust fines, sudden citations, and unexplained penalties. One neighbor confided that she had been threatened with foreclosure over late fees that weren't even hers. It was a pattern, and my footage was the missing link to prove it. Still, Marjorie wasn't about to back down. Within days of my return, she sent another notice, this time claiming that my attempt to tamper with the newly installed locks was a violation in itself. The audacity was staggering. She was doubling down, trying to spin the story in her favor. But every time she made a move, I countered it with evidence. Copies of the footage were delivered to legal counsel. Notes were prepared. A timeline was forming. The more I dug, the darker it became. Buried in HOA records, thanks to a sympathetic neighbor who once served on the board, I uncovered minutes from meetings where Marjorie had discussed strategic property acquisition. It turned out, several families who had left the neighborhood over the years had done so under suspiciously similar circumstances. Locks changed. Access denied. Properties bought out cheap, often by associates of the board. And those houses? They later ended up in the hands of Marjorie's relatives or friends, flipped for profit. Suddenly, it all clicked. This wasn't about lawn care or shutters. This was about money, power, and control. My house wasn't just another home, it was a target in a long-running scheme. By now, I had enough evidence to push back hard. But here's where the story took an even more shocking turn. Just as I was preparing to present my case formally, something unexpected happened. One evening, while reviewing more camera footage, I noticed movement again. Someone was inside my home, this time after I had returned. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, moving quietly through the living room, avoiding obvious sightlines. But the cameras caught them anyway. A gloved hand opened drawers, shuffled through mail, even attempted to disconnect one of the hidden cameras. They weren't just trying to intimidate me. They were trying to erase the proof. That night confirmed it, the HOA wasn't going to stop. They weren't going to admit defeat. They were escalating, desperate to cover their tracks, desperate to silence me before I exposed them. The war for my home, and for the truth, had only just begun. I had the evidence. I had neighbors willing to speak out. But now the HOA had crossed into criminal territory, sneaking into my house after dark. The locks were only the first strike in their plan, and if I didn't act fast, I risked losing more than just my home. The final confrontation was coming, and it would decide once and for all who truly owned my property, my peace, and my future. The HOA thought changing my locks was bold. Then they broke into my home at night, hoping to erase the proof. What they didn't know was that their every move had already been recorded, and I was ready to take them down once and for all. The following morning after the midnight intrusion, I replayed the footage over and over. The figure's movements were deliberate, cautious, but not cautious enough to escape my hidden cameras. Every motion was time-stamped. Every step was captured. They rifled through drawers, checked corners, even paused to look directly toward the kitchen camera before trying and failing to unplug it. The gloves they wore told me everything. This wasn't a random burglary. This was planned. Calculated. And it bore all the fingerprints of Marjorie's desperate attempt to regain control. At that point, the situation had escalated beyond HOA drama. It was criminal trespass, plain and simple. And now I had enough evidence to bring everything crashing down. I organized the footage into a detailed timeline, starting from the moment the contractors arrived with Marjorie during my vacation, to the changing of locks, to the discovery of the bogus violation letters, and finally to the late-night break-in attempt. The puzzle was complete, and the picture it painted was damning. But simply having proof wasn't enough, I needed to use it strategically. That's when I made two bold decisions. First, I contacted law enforcement. I handed them the full compilation of footage and the stack of paperwork left behind by the HOA. I explained the sequence, the trespassing, the attempted cover-up. The officer reviewing the files raised his brows more than once, and by the end of the meeting, he assured me that an investigation was not only warranted but unavoidable. The second decision was more public. I quietly shared snippets of the footage with neighbors, short clips showing Marjorie inside my living room with contractors, and another clip showing the masked intruder creeping through the house. I didn't need to say much. The videos spoke louder than any complaint could. Within days, the neighborhood was buzzing. Conversations at mailboxes. Whispered questions at the community pool. A silent realization spread: if they could do this to me, they could do it to anyone. Marjorie caught wind of it quickly. I could see her storming up and down the street, clipboard in hand, trying to reassure loyal board members and intimidate anyone who dared to question her. But her confidence was cracking. The smug smile she once wore was replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. She knew the walls were closing in. Then came the breaking point. At the next HOA meeting, which was usually a quiet gathering in the clubhouse, half the neighborhood showed up angry, restless, and demanding answers. I didn't have to shout or argue. I simply played the footage on a projector, letting the cameras tell the story. Gasps filled the room as the screen showed Marjorie striding into my living room with strangers, as contractors unscrewed my locks, as papers were planted on my counter. And then, the final nail, the masked figure creeping inside under cover of night. It was over. The room erupted with outrage. Neighbors who had stayed silent for years finally found their voices. They demanded resignations, legal action, and audits of the HOA's finances. Some shouted about their own experiences, fines that never made sense, threats of foreclosure, intimidation. The scheme was unraveling in real time, and Marjorie stood cornered in her own empire of rules. Law enforcement followed up quickly. With the footage, the documents, and now the testimony of multiple neighbors, the investigation shifted into high gear. Charges were considered for trespassing, fraud, and even conspiracy. The contractors, once smug and compliant, quickly turned cooperative when questioned, pointing the finger directly at Marjorie and the board's inner circle. As for me, the locks on my house were replaced again, this time by my choice, with the assurance that the key stayed firmly in my hand. The HOA board was gutted, with resignations piling in as the truth became impossible to deny. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted me with nods of respect, some even thanking me for standing up when they couldn't. But the most satisfying moment came weeks later, when I received a formal letter, not from the HOA, but from the county, confirming that their claims of repossession of property access held no legal standing whatsoever. In other words, everything they had done was smoke and mirrors, intimidation tactics wrapped in official-looking paper. And thanks to the cameras, every lie had been exposed. The HOA had tried to strip me of my home. Instead, they lost their control, their reputation, and their carefully crafted illusion of authority. And that's why I always tell people, never underestimate how far an HOA or a power-hungry neighbor will go. They may think they can bully you into silence, but evidence and persistence will always win in the end. So, what would you do if your locks were changed while you were away, and you came home to find your house no longer yours? Would you fight back or walk away? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more shocking HOA and neighborhood stories just like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.